Hi boys and girls, it's Miss Norton. I'm here today to talk to you about data and graphing. So the aims for this lesson are I can ask and answer questions about a graph by looking at the data. The second aim is I can create a graph when given the data. So some important words that we should know before we start talking about graphs and data. The first one is survey. And a survey is a list of questions that are used to get information from people. So you might send out a survey asking people what their favorite ice creams are. You might send out a survey asking people what their favorite season is, okay? And you send those out and then you get the information back. And that information is called data. And the data, like I said, is a collection of information. And once you have that information, you usually show it in a graph so that people can see what the results were. Okay, in a graph, there are different categories, and categories are groupings of things. So say that the survey asked people what their favorite seasons were. When you go to make the graph to show what the people answered, you would say, okay, one category is the people who liked winter. One category is people who like spring. One category is people who liked fall. And one category is the people who liked summer. Okay, and then the last important word that we're going to cover is symbols. And so sometimes when you make a graph, you might have different symbols to show what the results were. So I might choose, okay, I want to have suns in my graph to show how many people like summer, leaves in my graph to show how many people liked fall, snowflakes to show how many people liked winter. Those different pictures would be symbols for the people. So there are many different kinds of graphs and charts. And the first one we're going to talk about is a tally chart. And a tally chart uses tally marks. And tally marks are just those little lines. And each line represents one thing or one person. Okay, and when you get to 5, you go 4 down. You go 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you get to your 5th, you make a line across instead of down. So if we look at the tally chart, you see that the title of the tally chart tells us what was being talked about. Somebody must have sent out a survey asking people what their favorite pets were. And they could choose between cats, it looks like, dogs, and fish. So the way I read this is I go and I see the cat, and then I count the tally marks next to it to see how many people liked cats. And I can see there are 10 tally marks, so that means 10 people liked cats the most. Next to dogs, I see there were 4 tally marks, and next to fish, there are 6 tally marks. So this tally chart tells us a lot of information. I can see more tally marks next to cats, so I know more people liked cats. I don't see as many tally marks next to dogs, so I know not as many people liked dogs. Our next type of graph that we have here is called a picture graph. And if you look at the picture graph, once again, it has a title. And it was our class's favorite sports. And the reason it's called a picture graph is because you guessed it, it uses pictures. So what I would do here is I would just count up each of the pictures next to each category. So next to soccer, I see there were 6 soccer balls. Next to baseball, there are 4 baseballs. Next to football, there are 2 footballs. And next to basketball, there are 7 basketballs. So I could use that information, that data from the graph to answer the questions that they had below. After the picture graph, we have a pictograph. And they're very similar, but as you could see in the picture graph, when we were talking about basketball, it used pictures of basketballs. And when we were talking about football, it used pictures of football. For a pictograph, it does use symbols or little pictures, but they don't always match up what the category is. You see here that math, reading, and social studies they all used pencils as their symbol. They didn't say, oh, I'm going to have a picture of an addition sign for math and a picture of a book for reading and a picture of a globe for social studies. They just used little pencils as their symbol. Our next type of graph that we're looking at is called a bar graph. And these graph names are very easy for us to remember because a bar graph has, you guessed it, bars in it. And so like all of our other graphs, it has that title up top where it says our favorite sports. And then on the side, it says number of students. And then down below, it has the categories. It has the different kinds of sports. The way you read a bar graph is you always start at the bottom and then you track up. So I see, for instance, if I go to softball, I start all the way down at the bottom and I see that it goes and touches next to the number 4. That tells me that 4 people chose softball as their favorite sport. And then I would just do that for all of them. Basketball, I see 6 people chose it as their favorite sport. Soccer, they like to trick us. They put that bar up between 8 and 10. There's no number next to where soccer ends up. You have to be smart mathematicians and think in your head, what number comes between 8 and 10? What number comes between 8 and 10? You guessed it, 9. Yeah, so 9 friends chose soccer as their favorite sport. This is a little bit trickier. We don't even usually touch upon it in first grade, but I figured you guys are so bright that I could introduce it to you. So here we have something called a line graph. In a line graph, you just put different points where each person falls. So visitors to the park is what was talked about in this graph. So it says on Monday, 6 people visited the park. So I just put a little dot at the number 6 for Monday. And then Tuesday, 3 people visited. So next to Tuesday, they had 3. Then they did the same thing for each of the days of the week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. What makes a line graph special is that you take a pencil, or if you're doing it on the computer, you just connect the dots. So then you can look and see which days had a lot more people at the park, which days had a lot less people at the park. This is one of our last graphs or charts that we're going to talk about, and this is called a pie chart graph. And this one is special because it's in the shape of a circle instead of a square or a rectangle. This, like all of the other charts and graphs that we've learned about, has a title up top. And it's split off into different sections, though, to show how many people chose each option. And there's something at the bottom that's a little key. So, for instance, I see the word walking has like blue color next to it. So I would go over to my pie chart and I see that the blue section has 8 people. That means that 8 people travel to school by walking. Then let's see, I'm going to try a different one. I see that the word bus has a green square next to it. So I go over my pie chart, I look for the green section, and I see that 4 people take the bus to school. All right, this is the challenge. This is a real live graph that I did with the students in my classroom. So I'm gonna just ask these questions, but then it is your responsibility or your job, my challenge for you, to write the answers to these questions in the comments or to send the answers to your teacher on Class Dojo. So my first question is, what kind of graph is this? So remember, we learned about a tally chart, a line graph, we learned about a pie chart, pictograph, picture graph. What kind of graph or chart is this? My second question is, what is the title of the graph? My third question is, what were the categories for this graph? Think about it. Where might you find the different categories? And then my last question is, How many of the students were surveyed for this graph in all? Think. How would we find out in all how many people were surveyed? All right, friends, that is the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to ask your teachers on Class Dojo. They would love to help you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.